Hello, Year 12. We're looking at First Love, which is on page 23. At this moment in time, you've probably realised that the camera quality and audio quality is slightly different to normal. That's because it is 18 bajillion degrees in my office. So we're filming this using a cookie sheet on my clothes area in my back garden. So I think we should just get on with the poem, really. Let's start with First Love. Waking, with a dream of first love forming real words, as close to my lips as lipstick, I speak your name. After a silence of years, into the pillow, and the power of your name brings me here to the window, naked, to say it again to a garden shaking with light. This was a child's love, and yet I clench my eyes till the pictures return, unfocused at first, then almost clear, an old film played at slow speed. All day I will glimpse it, in the windows of changing sky, in mirrors, my lover's eyes, wherever you are. And later a star long dead here seems precisely the size of a tear. Tonight a love letter out of a dream stammers itself into my heart. Such faithfulness. You smile in my head on the last evening. Unseen flowers suddenly pierce and sweeten the air. So, one thing that I would recommend you note is the position of this poem in relation to the other poems in the collection. So if you look, page 22 was Moments of Grace. Page 24 was Café Royale. And page 25 is Crush. So can you see how it's going into those love poems? And that's kind of where this one comes in at the beginning of those. And it's first love, so it's the initial kind of moving off point of those poems. But also she talks about the idea of a child's love, the idea that it's sort of relatively young and innocent compared to if you looked at, for example, Adultery or Steam, where it's maybe a more mature kind of love. Even so, this poem does contain some kind of slightly sexualized images that we need to look at. If we start off though, it's given a dreamlike quality, waking with a dream of first love, forming real words. So you have this contrast between something that's a dream and something that is real, going straight along here. So you got the idea of contrast going on there. As close to my lips as lipstick, I speak your name after a silence of years. So first of all, you've got that repetition of the sounds. Can you see in lips as lipstick? It's almost sort of an assonant sound. And I speak your name. So do you remember when we looked at the other poems, we talked about how the way that the words are used, the way that language is used in the poems, and that idea of speaking versus silence is brought up again. So if you think about something like Grammar of Light, you have this idea of like speaking versus silence, the idea of a name, the idea of saying something, the kind of written word. And you have this here as well, a love letter stammers, this idea of eloquence and speaking. Now I also wanted to point out for you guys, just so that you could notice it, if you go back to Moments of Grace for a second, look at the first line of Moments of Grace. I dream through a wordless familiar place, and then link that to waking with a dream of first love forming real words. Oh, words I didn't highlight. See, this is what happens when it's a hot day and Miss tries to teach poetry. So can you see how you've got the waking and the dream, and that links this one to this one? They go together. So I know when we talked about Moments of Grace, we talked about that. And when we talked about, now we're talking about First Love, we're talking about that same idea. So you've got that idea straight away. Now the idea of speaking the name after a silence of years into the pillow. It could be the idea of shame, like hiding her face. Or think about another situation in which someone might speak someone else's name into a pillow. And you'll get the idea. And the power of your name brings me here to the window naked. And this is what makes this, if you were going to do it, that's what makes that sexualized. But it doesn't necessarily need to be sexualized. Like, I think if you were writing about it in an exam situation, I would probably allude to the fact that it's kind of a sexualized image. But also, naked could just mean, like, bare or unprotected. It's this idea of vulnerability. To say it again to a garden shaking with light. Well, light doesn't shake things. So it's this idea that that's maybe a bit of a mixed image, and maybe the idea of shaking is suggesting like fear, which would go with that idea of vulnerability. You have the idea of the garden, which goes again with the idea of disgrace, which we're going to look at in a little bit more. But this idea of like a kind of image of like a pleasant place that's maybe damaged. So if we think about a Paradise Lost here, that might kind of help us think about the way that the garden's being used there. Oh, sorry guys, I bumped my cookie sheet. This was a child's love, and yet I clenched my eyes till the pictures return, unfocused at first, then almost clear. So she describes it as a child's love. It's got this innocence in it, but also you've got the idea of time coming through. And you see time especially in, if you look here, pictures, an old film played at slow speed. Obviously speed is related to time as well. I would link this to Never Go Back. Do you remember the last stanza of Never Go Back? When she talks about the city being like a film as she's going away in the train. I would also think about this in terms of Pluto. Do you remember in Pluto he talks about the people as their photographs? If you wanted to talk about memory, you could link it to The Good Teachers. Do you know how in The Good Teachers the whole metaphor of the beginning part of the poem is that they're taking a school photograph and she's run around the back, but also she breathes on the photo of her teacher until she fogs up the picture. So you've got all of those things going on in there. That could be absolutely fine. So you've got all of those going on. And I think those kind of pull it back. The idea of unfocused, then almost clear, is the idea of like the fallibility of memory. So should we say fallible memory? Because I haven't got loads of space on this book. All day I will glimpse it in the windows of the changing sky and mirrors my lover's eyes wherever you are. Right, now you haven't read this poem yet, but absolutely you should link this to Meantime. And when we do Meantime, you'll be like, oh yeah, that obviously links to Meantime, but it makes sense to make the note now so that you have it for when we do that poem. Okay, and then look at how here you've got the kind of the reflections going on. So let's grab a different colour. Which one haven't we used yet? Okay, so look at this. Windows, mirrors, eyes. They are all reflections, reflective surfaces. So it's the idea of reflecting on something. Being reflective means to think back over something that you've done. But we've talked as well, if you think about your Jane Eyre use of reflections, like the rational glass, you've got absolutely that one going on. And it pulls together that idea that someone's thinking back over their life. They're seeing, although they think they're seeing this other person, they're actually seeing their own reflection. Now, it could be they're seeing their own reflection because they are, like, they've been affected by that person, so that person's become part of their own identity. Or it could be that they are feeling like that person's become them, so they can only see that person, but they're actually seeing themselves. Or it could be they're seeing their own feelings about that person. So it's kind of this idea of how far is your identity mixed up with the other person that you love's identity. Then we go on to this next stanza. And later a star long dead here seems precisely the size of a tear. So, first off, have you noticed you've got this internal rhyme going on. And look at this double comma here. We've got a splitting off as zero. Think about the idea of something being split up whenever you see that. I will stop hitting the cookie sheet soon, guys, I promise. But a star long dead, well, that's time again, coming back. Let's grab the highlighter for time. What were we using? Pink. Because if a star, tonight, faithfulness, last evening, suddenly. So if you think about a star, stars last for a long time, but if it's long dead, because do you know that thing where if you can see a star in the sky, there's a chance that because of how far the light has had to travel, the star is actually dead. So that's kind of what's going on here. And the idea that a star is a big thing, but it seems small. So you've got this imagery of like sadness in the tear, but it's also the idea of maybe a loss of proportion, because sometimes people think their first love is a bigger deal than maybe it really is. It's not necessarily the biggest relationship of your life, but it might have a disproportionate impact. The idea of the star long dead, by the way, if you were ever going to link something to Pluto, I think that's a lovely way to do it, thinking about yourself as linked to the astronomy. Tonight, a love letter out of a dream stammers itself in my heart. Do you remember we had that stammers before for the butterfly as well? And the idea of stammering in a heart, think about the beat of a heart as being like a stammer. It's kind of like the syllables here are almost representing the way the heart is beating out of time. Such faithfulness. Well, the idea is that it's maybe almost ironic, because the idea is that they've moved on from this relationship, but it's the idea that it's become such a big part of them that sticking to this relationship is in some way kind of faithful. And also the heart maybe is the one that's not being faithful. The heart is betraying them by stammering. You smile in my head on the last evening. It doesn't say what the last evening is, so I would pull up this idea of last. I would also talk about the idea of nostalgia here, because obviously it's the pain of the past. The last evening, we don't know why that's the last evening. Is that the last evening of their relationship when they broke up? Is that the last evening they saw each other? It's not clear why it's the last evening. Unseen flowers suddenly pierce and sweeten the air, and that's how we link ourselves to nostalgia even more, because obviously it's the bug on my poem. There we go. It's pain and sweetness. Can you see pierce and sweeten? So it's both painful and sweet, like nostalgia is painful and sweet. But they're sudden, so they're comparing that with the long dead star. You've got something that's taken a long time versus something that's happened immediately. And the idea that they're unseen flowers, they're somewhere else, they're somewhere that you maybe can't see them, that they've gone by. So that was First Love. Make sure that you annotate the poem. Have a lovely day, and when the traffic noise stops, hopefully I'll be seeing you soon.